Welcome to Cinnamon Babe Horror Stories. I'm Cinnamon Babe, and every Friday I discuss creepy topics while I do my makeup. So if that interests you, please like and subscribe, and please enjoy the video. So the act of humans eating human flesh has been practiced throughout history and throughout numerous cultures across the world. From ritualistic practices to desperate survival tactics, today's video will explore the dark and taboo subject of cannibalism. The Donner Party was a group of pioneers who decided to migrate to California from Illinois. So the group departed from Independence, Missouri, which is on the Oregon Trail, in the spring of 1846. And they were led by wealthy brothers George and Jacob Donner and their friend James Reed. Such a distance usually took around 4 to 6 months by wagon. But the Donner Party made a fatal mistake and took a route called the Hastings Cutoff. Hastings Cutoff was an alternative route for westward travel of that time. So the trail basically cut through the Smoky Mountains and present-day Utah, and it bypassed established trails. Along the way, the Donner Party began to collect families that were also headed westward to join them. There were many warning signs about the Hastings Cutoff basically being impossible to pass. So James Reed, one of the leaders of the migration, it was his idea to take the Hastings Cutoff because there was a book written about it, and the book was written by a man with the last name Hastings, and that is why it's called the Hastings Cutoff. But the author of the book had never taken this route himself. James Reed believed that the Hastings Cutoff was going to be like a shortcut. But because the terrain was so brutal and almost impossible to get through by wagon, they were only able to move 1 mile a day, which usually, if you're at a normal terrain, you were able to move at least 15 miles per day. So in May 26, 1846, the group tried to pass by the Big Blue River that runs through parts of Kansas, but it was extremely flooded, and it was ridiculously hard to pass through, and they had to create rafts to get their supplies and basically all their luggage across, and it was just extremely difficult. The party had only packed 4 months of food, but because of the incredible slowdown from taking this cutoff, their supplies began to dwindle. Settlers also faced Native American tribes stealing many of their cattle. Some of the cattle running away, some of the cattle getting sick and dying, and this resulted in at least 100 of the lost cattle. And so there goes their plan to eat the cattle if they needed to based off of their supplies dwindling, and it also resulted in loss of basically power of the cows basically pulling the heavy equipment and supplies, and so that resulted in them abandoning wagons, heavy luggage, and having to carry a lot of it themselves. And like I said, whatever they couldn't carry, they had to abandon. Kind of funny, but not. But the Native American people were almost trying to get back at them because they were even shooting the cattle. If they didn't steal it, they would shoot them. So with the food supply dwindling, which basically consisted of wheat, cornmeal, flour, beans, dried meats and stuff like that. Once those supplies began to dwindle and they had to carry a lot of the things that they had on foot because a lot of the wagons were being abandoned, tensions began to rise. And James Reed, which was one of the leaders, he ended up getting really mad at a guy because I guess the guy was treating animals badly. James Reed got really upset with him and stabbed him in the stomach as a result. And because there was no legal authorities around, the group just basically decided to exile James and just leave him by himself. And I guess no one really knows what became of him. He probably just died, which is crazy. Many parts of the terrain included Nevada, and trekking through Nevada was extremely brutal and hot, and the group began to burn through their water supply very quickly. By July 1846, half of the group decided, you know what, we're done with the Hastings Cutoff, let's just go with the safer route, and they split up. The remainder of the group, which was a little smaller, decided to continue the Hastings cutoff for whatever reason. I really don't know why they were so faithful to this cutoff when they had nothing but bad luck. And they basically blamed James Reed for choosing to do this in the first place. But like I said, he ended up being exiled anyway. Some of the elderly and sick had to be left behind if they were too weak to continue. So in October of 1846, the group had reached California, a little past the state line. They were in the Sierra Mountain Range, and they ended up getting hit with a tremendous snowstorm, and they got snowed in for months. So like I said, the group did not have a lot of supplies, and that included food. They got by at first just eating cow bones, cowhide, leather, tree bark, hide from their makeshift shelters, but when that ran out, they had nothing left. And so during this time, there was no way they could hunt and get any other types of food because of this snowy mountain range. So they made the decision to eat the dead. And there were some settlers that just made the decision to just starve to death. And so some members of the group decided to leave by foot to seek for help. And there were several failed rescue missions. They could not reach where the full party was, and so they kept failing at rescuing them, which really sucks. So the group had ended up staying out there in the Sierra Mountains for 4 months. By the time the remainder of the party was rescued, the numbers had severely declined from, it was 87 to 48 people and 3 mules. And I'm guessing that they used the mules for just basically to carry whatever supplies they had left. But I don't know, me personally, and not judging people for what they did in harsh times, but what I would have done was slaughtered the mules, all 3 of them, and dried the meat and try to make it last, because they were out there for 4 months. But I guess that's also a death sentence, to basically get rid of your only form of transportation. But mind you, it's 47 people, so I don't know. That's probably what I would have done. So in October of 1972, an Air Force aircraft crashed in the Andes Mountains. They were headed to Santiago, Chile. The pilot had mistakenly thought that they had flown over Curico, which is the north turning point, basically headed to the airport. And mind you, the Andes Mountains is located in Argentina. So he had mistakenly thought that they were close enough basically to lower down to reach the airport. At this time, the passengers started to notice, we're getting dangerously close to the mountains. What's going on? By the time the pilot realized he had made a mistake, it was too late. He was unable to gain back altitude and basically go back up. And he ended up crashing into one of the mountains, and it snapped off both the wings of the airplane and the tail. And the remainder of the plane slid down a glacier and hit an icebound. The flight was carrying 45 people total, and 19 of those passengers was a famous, well, not famous, but professional rugby team called the Old Christian Club, and the rest was their supporters, family, and friends. 3 crew members and 9 passengers died that day from the crash. Many that were left behind had broken bones and severe cuts and damages to their body. And so, due to the severe weather in the mountains, several members also died, or passengers also died that day. So in order to have a search party find them, the remainder of the passengers used the luggage to make a cross in the snow. And they also used their footsteps to make a SOS sign in the snow. And there were several attempts for rescue aircrafts to fly over the area, but they failed to see them because of all the white snow. They couldn't see the remainder of the plane, and I guess it was just too hidden amongst all the white snow. They just couldn't see the SOS sign and the cross that they put there, which is like so frustrating. Unfortunately, after 8 days of searching, the search party was called off. The remainder of the passengers endured 72 days of terror. That included avalanche, starvation, succumbing to exposure, malnutrition, scurvy. 13 more passengers would pass away. During the 2.5 months up in the mountains, the surviving passengers used the luggage and broken seats to close off the gaping hole in the aircraft that they were using for their shelter, because it was sub-zero temperatures. And it's so sad because many of the passengers, if not all of them, had lived in warm temperatures by the ocean and had never experienced frigid temperatures or even snow. They had never even seen snow, so it just made the experience even more terrorizing. They devised a solar power water collector out of sheet metal. They used green plastic from the aircraft to fashion sunglasses to prevent snow blindness, because I guess because of the whiteness of the snow you can become blind from it and you can't see at all. They created like snow boots, snowshoes out of the seat cushions from the seats. They took like the cloth that was made to make the seats and like sewn them together and made blankets. And the captain of the rugby team, Marcelo Perez, took on a leadership role. They had found a radio and were able to repair it enough so that they could use it, and unfortunately they were able to hear when the search party was called off. So they only had like a small amount of food to last them, and it only lasted them for like, I guess, the first week of the crash, and they rationed it out very small. They had 8 bars of chocolate, they had several bottles of wine, they had dried fruit, they had 1 tin of mussels, 3 small jars of jam, and a little bit of candy, and that's basically like airplane food, like snacks. Like I said, they were only able to make it last them a week, and they were only eating like little bits of it a day. So then the group began to eat cotton and leather from the luggage and the seats, and that just made them sick. They were hoping that when they cut open the seats that they would find at least hay or something that's sort of edible, but they didn't. Mind you, the bodies of the dead are preserved perfectly outside of the aircraft that they were staying in, and there was no vegetation, and there was no animals in the area that they were at. All the passengers were Catholic, and they knew that they only had one option left, and that was to eat the dead. But they felt so conflicted because of their religious beliefs. They felt that they would be committing a huge sin against humanity, and they felt like God would be angry at them. But then they started to like look into like biblical text and to just basically think about like what their loved ones would want them to do if they were in this situation. And so they began to give each other permission to, like, hey, you can eat my sounds so sad, you can eat my remains if I was to pass away. They were able to basically biblically justify what they were doing, as they should, and they made the decision to eat the dead. So Canessa was one of the passengers, and I believe he was a medical student at the time, and he was going to lead by example. So he cut like a match-sized piece of flesh from one of the bodies, and he was the first to swallow and eat it. After he did that, many of the passengers followed suit. There were some that just declined. They could not bring themselves to do it because a lot of the bodies, if not all of them, were friends and family. Parado, he was another passenger. He had lost his mother and sister due to the crash, and so he hid their bodies, and I believe another passenger hid his nephew's body from being consumed. Like, those were the only 3 bodies that were off limits. And so the rest of the remainder of the bodies were butchered and hung up in the sun to like dry, to just make it a little easier for them to eat. They ate the skin, the muscles, the fat, the brain, the lungs, the heart, pretty much whatever piece of meat that they could get a hold of, and they consumed it. I mentioned the avalanche that occurred. There was a large avalanche that occurred, and it basically dragged the plane and completely buried it with the passengers inside. And it also, I don't know exactly how many people it killed off at the time, But some more of the passengers had died from the avalanche. And not only did they die, but it had trapped the remainder of the survivors in the plane with the dead. So they were no longer able to go in and out of the plane at the time. And so they were trapped in there for, I think, 3 days. And because of that, they still had to eat. And so they had to basically eat the meat just fresh from the dead bodies instead of how it was. Like I said, they were able to dry it at first and try to like prepare it, but this time they had to just eat it straight from the body. So Parado described the experience of what it was like to eat the meat, and he said that it was greasy, it was like wet with blood, and it was soft. And he said that it had like parts of cartilage in it. And so he said he gagged when he had to eat it that way. So Nando Parado and Roberto Canessa were the two men that decided, okay, enough is enough. The search party has been called off, so it's time for us to go and get help ourselves. And so they decided to trek the wilderness, like down the mountain together, and it was a long distance. And because of that, they also had to take large amount of the human meat and like eat a lot of it in order to get the basic calories they needed to do the large trek that they were doing. So I believe the trek took about 10 days. It took them about 2 days to get down the mountain, and the slopes were about 15 feet long. Said they left December 12th and were able to reach Chile December 22nd, and were able to get a rescue team out to the remainder of the survivors. There are about 14 survivors left, and this is crazy to me. They basically sent helicopters, and the helicopters are only able to get a certain amount of passengers in it, and they had to leave the rest of the passengers and come back the next day. Do you know how frustrating that had to be for those poor people? Like, oh my God, they're finally here to save us. We can only take some of you guys, and literally left them. And they had to like stay there overnight, one more night. That had to probably feel like the worst feeling ever. Even though they knew somebody was coming, still, like, you just want to get out of there and leave. But I'm sure they left them with like comforts, and like, I'm sure they gave them food and blankets and like things they needed to get through the night, but still that would like literally just kill my spirit. Like, I'd be so frustrated. So when they all were finally rescued, they were all hospitalized for scurvy, malnutrition, altitude sickness, and broken bones and whatever injuries that they had had. And the press basically went crazy. At first, the passengers pretty much lied about what they survived on. They just basically said, oh, we had like meats and cheeses and whatever the plane had. But at first they lied because they knew that it was going to be hard to tell the public what they had done. Once this full story was told, reports of cannibalism hit worldwide, and there was even a photograph of a half-eaten leg released to the public, which I feel like is just so insensitive and exploitive. But you know how the media is. So it was like a big media storm. There was a lot of criticism and backlash to the survivors for eating human remains, because, you know, people just tend to judge and not really look into the situation, instead of saying, hey, these people had no other option to survive. Like I said, there was no vegetation, there was no animals, there was nothing else for them to eat, so they did the best that they could do at the time. And the families of the victims, pretty much, they were very supportive and forgave the survivors for eating their loved ones, because it was their loved ones too. It wasn't like it was just complete strangers. A lot of them were friends and family to the survivors. So it's just really like sad how it happened. But also the remains, there was about 15 remains that was left up at the mountains. They did not retrieve them. What they did was they flown out Catholic priests, and the Catholic priests basically prayed over the bodies, and they had the bodies buried at the crash site. And then they erected a stone memorial, and they put like an orange cross there, basically commemorating what had happened. And there was one guy whose son had passed out there, and basically it was illegal for anybody to retrieve the bodies. They basically just left them there. Well, they buried them, but they left them up there. And so the father of one of the victims, he sent out an illegal track up there or whatever, and they got the body, and he ended up getting arrested for that. Judges basically saw like the case for what it was, and they released him. But it's just crazy that they thought, like, they basically charged him with grave robbery. So the survivors made a full recovery, and in 1993, the movie Alive was aired, and it's actually a really good movie. I watched it when I was a kid, and then I've watched it like a couple more times after that, and it's a really inspiring, like, really good movie. So in conclusion, basically both stories are very similar. It consisted of a great amount of people that hit tragedy, and their only option to survive and basically to act in cannibalism. But neither of the stories of the victims are at fault, in my opinion, and many other people can agree with that basically you do what you have to do, and no one has the right to judge you for it. And yeah, I just thought that the stories were really interesting. I was watching The Shining, and in the beginning, the little boy was talking to his dad about the Donner Party, and I ended up researching into it, and it just seemed like a very interesting story to talk about. And like I said, I've seen the movie Alive, and that's how I know about the Andes crashing. There was a movie in 2009 called The Donner Party. It was made about the Donner Party experience. I've never seen it. I don't really watch movies like that. I guess if it's like scary and they make it scary, but like, I don't know, that could be exploitive, because a lot of times like movies will make things out to be just ridiculous. But the movie Alive was very inspiring. But yeah, maybe I'll watch that one day. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed the video. Please leave your thoughts in the comments below. Please like and subscribe, and please stay tuned for the next video. Bye.